As bold as lions. As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
You're listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast.
Well, welcome to the As Bold as Lions podcast. My name is Derek. So good to have you join me today. Wherever you're at when you're listening to this, I hope you're blessed. Hope you're encouraged. As I record this, we're in the middle of July, kind of hitting those, I guess, dog days of summer. And I've never really known what that phrase meant. But I assume it applies to just kind of these deep days of summer where you've got your heat and humidity, these months of July and August where you're just really in the thick of it. Somehow that's the dog days of summer is what I've always attributed that to. Somebody might be able to enlighten me a little bit more of how that name came about. But anyways, we are moving through summer. I am looking forward to flannel weather and fall and pumpkin spice and things like that. Kind of ways to say, shh, don't tell anybody, but I am kind of ready for that already. Sort of have a fondness for the fall, that season, those months, kind of that transition, even though it's back into winter and all of that. For some reason, I'm just ready for it. So I know it's still a long ways off from where we're at right now as I hit record and start talking, because we're in the South and it's hot. But those days are headed eventually. And for some reason, I seem to always go back to some pre-show banter about the weather. I'm sorry if you're tired of hearing that every time you listen to an episode, but it seems like the weather is like this just subject that we can all kind of talk about and have an opinion. But I think I need to find some other talking points. I don't know what it could be, but I'll have to keep digging and thinking about what I can use as a kind of kick off an episode. But as we start today, you probably saw the title. You may be kind of wondering what all of this is about. It's just a title that says some thoughts on the church post-COVID. And honestly, if you search that topic on Google or search engine, you would probably find a lot of articles. You would find some very expert, some expertise, some wise sage advice out there that has more experience maybe in all these matters than what I have to offer. But this episode is a lot of my own opinion, but sort of opinion with experience, I guess, maybe how I would term it. These next couple episodes are sort of one-offs, as I call them. They're not necessarily part of a series, but just individual content that is just stands on its own. Although I think there's some overlap as you maybe go from the seasons of this podcast and you hear different themes that there's a lot of things that just kind of keep coming back. And I think you'll hear some of that today throughout this topic. So, like I said, what follows today is a lot of my own opinion. You'll hear that a lot. And some of it is the context that we're in and just cultural things that are going on. For anybody that hasn't maybe listened very long to the podcast, heard other episodes, some of my background has been in ministry for several years, either volunteer, part-time, full-time, kind of across the board, especially in worship. And then As Bold as Lions is kind of a complete sideline project, which is, outside of the church, kind of stands on its own, but is a lot of times directed to church matters and church things and just cultural things that we're also considering. But I've been in either the Bible Belt, which is where we reside now, kind of the buckle of the Bible Belt, and the surrounding Nashville area, or in the upper Midwest for the last 20 or so years. So those are kind of some of I guess the lens I put on as I think about this conversation, about these points, that's a lot of my own background and I guess the setting, some of the foundation for how I look at it. I can't ascertain every single aspect, region of this country and beyond into the world. But I think as we talk about the church, there's some things that I can just say, this is what I've seen. This is my experiential, own process as I've looked at where we've come and kind of where we're heading. I think we're in a real season of transition. I think we're kind of just in this long period of going from one thing to the next. And it's taking a while. And as devastating as COVID itself was and is, it brought some things to the forefront. And in some ways that was good because it's been this time of revelation. And if I can say it, just removal of chaff, kind of a burning away of things that are not true necessarily. A lot of revelation. That's a huge word. I think that is part of what COVID did in these areas. And I'm titling this, in the title it says post-COVID. And I don't want to get anybody's alarms raised or say, well, COVID's still a thing. It still exists. I know somebody just had COVID or whatever, or I've had COVID. Yeah, it's still there. It's still something that is being transmitted and has mutated and, all these things that we know. But I guess when I say post-COVID and when you see that term online, we're really saying post-2020 and the years that have followed here. We're still kind of in the wake of all of that. But just kind of the recent years following that main heavy part of the pandemic. I think we'll suffer ripple effects from COVID for years, for decades, really, because of the things that have happened. I expect it for the rest of my lifetime that we'll always kind of go back to this COVID experience, and whether I'm alive for the next 30 to 50 years, I don't know, maybe less, whatever, but it will always be a part of a conversation, in terms of like, we lived through that, we experienced that caused this and that and all these things. It's just gonna, even now people are always referring things in terms of, was it before COVID? Was it after COVID? All of that. It's just in our terminology very strongly now. And I don't think in saying that, what I just said is anything that's really opinion necessarily there. I think that's factual. I think that's what COVID has done. And we can all kind of agree, like, yeah, we're living in this kind of post-COVID age now. So specifically looking at the church today, I think there's many takeaways that we can have. And the church really has come through this period of the last 2-3 years with some scars, with definitely some bumps and bruises. It's taken its toll. Attendance, if looking at attendance itself, there's a site called igniteamerica.com. This figure was from there. Says 28% of those who were regular church attenders, meaning regular pre-COVID, 28% of those have not attended in person or watched an online worship service even one time since the outbreak. Now that seems really high. I tried to verify if that is correct. And the more searching I did around that number, it did seem to come up, where there was like almost a 30% sort of drop, from some sites. Some were a little bit less, but there definitely is this downward trend in attendance and in-person attendance that we've seen since the pandemic and since everything kind of shut down. A lot of churches that closed during COVID just simply never reopened. We know that as well. For budgets, for churches that are operating on a fixed budget, that some of those things have been affected as giving has dried up, as congregations have seen decreased giving. Something we'll kind of talk about a little bit more here. And then just kind of this whole draw to preach, for lack of some better words, just feel good messages and kind of towards those itching ears, as the Bible talks about, those type of, woke, watered down kind of messages that have gone out, that there's been, in some instances, just a draw to do that and to kind of be caught up in that, as that seems to be a bigger just push in the culture in general. And that it's not really a saving message, and it's not necessarily a message that is over the long term going to cause a church to grow and increase. Again, my opinion there, but I think those are some things that are true. So a lot of that is bad news right off the top. And a lot of that just is kind of the sobering, like, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. But even in the midst of the bad news, there's opportunity. And I know this is a longer introduction, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage here for this discussion, for what we're going to talk about. And honestly, I'll be saying this a few times, but I'd love to hear from you in terms of this discussion, to kind of just get feedback, because I feel like this is one of those things that I'm just putting out there and just saying, this is what I'm seeing. This seems to be more than just my immediate circle and locality. This seems to be a lot of different pockets around the country and around the world. So what are you seeing? Do you agree with what is going to be posed today? And what are some of the trends that you've heard about where you live? What gives you hope as you look at the future of the church? And what are some things that truly concern you and are just things that you're trying to give to the Lord and surrender to Him? So I've got some points here. There's 5 in total that, for me, as I kind of just brainstormed this, they seem to be the things that just popped up right away that are like the most glaring of the state of the church and some things post-COVID. Maybe you would have 5 things that are a different list for you. Maybe you wouldn't have a list at all. But because society at large has changed so much dramatically, it makes sense that the church is going to be affected by some of that as well. And even here where I live, where we didn't necessarily lock down so much and we didn't stop just normal daily life, there's still been an effect. It still has been in front of our faces on the news and on our social media, and we can't avoid it. So it had an effect pretty much everywhere. So diving in, what does the future hold? Here are some thoughts, some takeaways that I think affect the church post-COVID that we need to consider. First thing, online church community. The online church community is not a substitute for real community. And I guess real community meaning in person. In person cannot be substituted by an online experience. I'm going to have a verse for all these that just kind of ties in. Hebrews 10:24 and 25, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So just talking about that is kind of specifically, don't neglect meeting together. I don't think this first point is necessarily earth-shattering for a lot of folks, but I think many were forced from just having to do maybe we were dabbling in getting an online presence set up. A lot of churches were like, well, that seems to be kind of a thing that a lot of places are doing, so maybe we should start streaming our services. We should get on Facebook Live. We should get on YouTube. We should do these things because it seems to be the way of the future. Well, COVID hit and it was like, okay, now you have to do these things. Now in order to reach people you can no longer meet together. You have to hold some sort of service online and still provide that opportunity for people to worship somehow on a Sunday. We went through it. It's kind of a shorter period because, again, things didn't necessarily lock down, and it was pretty wide open to say if you want to do that, that's fine. If you don't, so it didn't seem like it was so much forced in our area, but we still did it, and it still kind of propelled us into thinking like, okay, here's how we have to do online services. And for the church that I'm at, we do a weekly broadcast. And I would say at this point, it's now more so for potential new guests, visitors that are looking to check out our church, but not for hardly anybody who's just like, this is my church and I'm just watching it week after week. Or for a few people that maybe they're out of town and they try to catch the message. There's a few of those, but it's not this thing where I'm just tuning in every week because this is my church. And I think we had to go to it for a while, but it couldn't sustain because it wasn't meant to sustain this online presence, this online community. You know, as much as we're saying, oh, Facebook and social media is this great way to connect and to keep up with people despite the miles and the distance and all this stuff, it never substitutes for just in-person, face-to-face experiences. So I think it bridged a gap for a season, but now that season's over. And really that season should have been a lot shorter than it was, but some of those things were beyond our control. Sometimes the church just kind of laid down and said, okay, we'll just comply rather than fighting to stay open. There were other businesses or other places, you know, you hear the thing of like, well, the church can't meet, but the strip club's open and the bar's open and just like the double standard, which we heard about, and that was real and that happened and it's sad, but people are hungry for community. There's an aspect to community that can never and really will never be reached through just these online services alone. And isolation was hard on folks. Saw it some here, but I go to other places, especially places where they're just kind of coming out of all that and experiencing some of that freedom. And you can just tell it's been hard. It's been hard on some of these communities to just shut down. So that's our first point, is that really, for as much as the online thing was a season, it can't replace the community that we need. Second point is the move toward smaller is wise. Getting creative here with this verse, Acts 1:14. All these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. So kind of this small group that comes together in the beginning stages of Acts. And I'll preface this point by saying this is probably the most the most of my own opinion comes through this point, which I know a lot of this is opinion, but here I think it comes through just, and maybe some of it's personal preference, maybe some of it's not. And it's just kind of, again, experiential. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing, and I'm going to hold to this. So for a while, kind of coming out of COVID, it seemed like there was maybe this trend that would start of getting away from, I guess, the mega church sort of concept and a decline of that. But I'm not sure if the numbers are truly reflecting that. It's hard to tell, and I was trying to do some research of that. I think I'm maybe safe to say that decline is happening or could be more so in coming years. I saw some stats the other day and I was going back trying to find them and I couldn't, but it's basically just showing various church sizes, kind of like here's your 0 to 100, here's your 100 to 250, kind of these cutoff points that they have. And then eventually you get to this certain size, which is typically mega church size. I'm not sure if that's over 1,000 or over 2,000. But, being that level then starts to get to this smaller percentage of people that are attenders, or would say they're in that category. And it's maybe like, I want to say 15 to 20% that were in the stat. But don't quote me there. But I think the takeaway for me is that we need to think smaller. Why do I say that? In many ways, this megachurch movement is maybe less hands-on. I'm not going to be able to say that across the board, but less hands-on in just the small day-to-day things. I'm, again, painting a little bit of a wide brush here, but we see the services online. We see the big name pastors. We see the books, kind of the big of all of this. And it seems like it's really a lot about that. These large group meetings. Is ministry happening at this level? Can it happen? Sure. Is it sustainable forever? And we've kind of been in this age of the mega church for a while now, but I think COVID is shaking that up a little bit. Is it the most effective way to keep reaching the culture now in this post-COVID time? I think even if a mega church is to survive, the bigger it gets, it has to keep thinking smaller and smaller of how to kind of meet the needs within its community. If it's one of these mega churches that has multiple sites and campuses, satellites, how do you reach all those areas? And maybe that is the way, is you keep kind of subdividing in even though it's this 10,000 member church, it's in all these different areas and smaller sizes. I'm kind of spitballing there, but, some of this too is just the mega church movement within COVID, within the first few months, kind of through all that. There were some scandals. There were some things that came out. I think especially of Hillsong and some of the things with like Hillsong, New York, and the scandal with its pastor there, the big mothership Hillsong in Australia, and some stuff going on there with Brian Houston, and just knowing like Hillsong is not just this mega church, but it has such an influence on the worship and on so many things that filter down to just so many churches. Just a huge reach. So, and that's not an isolated church. There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of stories of just falling from grace, those types of things. And it kind of reminds me of going back to the 80s and 90s when we saw these sort of scandals within televangelists and things like that, where we're repeating some of that. And that it almost had to bring about some new, God was cleaning house a little bit and doing some new things. And I think there is kind of a changing of the guard that is still happening within all this. I think to really address some of these things, you have to say, well, at this level, when you get such a big platform, is there still the accountability there that these ministries need? If you're a Stephen Furtick, if you're a Joel Osteen, if you're a, the list goes on, and I'm not bashing those guys. I'm just saying, is there accountability around these men, as they get these bigger and bigger platforms? I think to have real community, we have to divide and conquer. It keeps getting smaller. Smaller movements, even home church movements, those are some viable alternatives, and that we're seeing a lot of that. Thinking about the Acts 2 church and how it began, how it grew, and it expanded, but logistically they couldn't all meet together in the same place. They had to keep meeting in homes or in smaller locations where they could gather. So again, divide and conquer. So that's a lot of my own opinion on that, and I'd love to hear some talk back on that if you have an opinion that maybe is different from that, or maybe you agree. But I think we're seeing some shifts within this quote unquote mega church movement that are beginning to then affect the greater Christian, especially in America, our church movement as it goes. Third point, giving needs to get back to an Acts 2 sort of mentality. I'm going to read Acts 2:42 through 47. This is kind of that big passage that talks about what it looked like, what they were doing. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So we're in this period of recession, economic downturn, and a lot of that is affected and halted giving. There was an article from June 2022. This is www.councilofnonprofits.org. Title of the article said, "New giving data and reports are showing giving stays flat and worrisome trend as few donors continue." So this is talking about, just like charitable giving, nonprofits. It actually showed that from 2020 to 2021, there was a 4% increase in charitable giving. But when you factor in inflation, that's actually a decrease in charitable giving. And won't say that necessarily directly equivalents to church giving, tithing, but I think there definitely are some trends that you can kind of cross over and say that's the same thing is happening within the church. The church is feeling it. And I think there's a standard of generosity that has changed because of what's going on with the economy. And I'm not sure how we address it. I think there's getting back to this biblical teaching, especially on the teaching of the tithe, the literal 10% tithe of our first fruits. And if you want to do a little more digging on that, I did a podcast this year called Be Generous. It was a 2-part series. I think it's the first episode that talks about giving of our money and our resources. So I go into that there within that a little bit more detail. I think some churches have just stopped preaching on this message of giving, stewardship, things like that. I think it can be a little bit culturally motivated because we see giving now being this thing that's more so motivated out of feeling and emotion rather than out of biblical obedience. Giving to something because, well, this pulls on the heartstrings, so I'll throw a 20 in the plate or write a check for 100 or whatever, rather than saying, I work and I give a tithe to my local church, and that's what I'm called to do as a Christian, as a believer, biblically speaking. So we have that sort of mentality kind of going on right now. And as we look at the New Testament, giving was about giving everything, sharing resources, kind of banding together. And perhaps this is a little bit wider than the scope of this podcast, because it's getting into a little bit more of again, back to the giving generosity sort of theme. But how does a church become a place that does this, that operates like this, kind of bringing in this Acts 2 mindset? And again, I think it's thinking smaller, it's subdividing, it's ways to figure out how to minister to the needs that we see in front of us. And when you get smaller, I feel like there's an opportunity to have maybe more of those discussions and know what is going on within the members and the needs of your body. And then supporting local ministries that are doing this as well, especially faith-based ones, finding those that you can partner with and give to and be involved with. So the need to kind of look at giving, because it's affecting a lot of things, as people they're counting their pennies and they're just saying, the price of this is going up and the price of that. But the needs out there are not going away. If anything, they're greater. And how can the church be right in the middle of that and really not depending on the government, not depending upon this social program or that social program, but being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ in meeting those things. Fourth point, as we're motoring through here, signs and wonders should be commonplace. Going back to that Acts 2 passage, verse 43 says, everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. The early church saw the miraculous. And my question is, did those things end? Some movements today, they don't lean this way. They would say, and God bless them, they're very gospel focused. They preach the gospel, but they seem to lack some of the power that is available to them through the Holy Spirit. And on the flip side, yes, there are some ministries that can go too heavily into seeking after signs and wonders, but they sort of neglect really teaching the gospel as well. It's kind of a balance of all of this. What are some of those things that we should be seeing? Well, I think it's what they talk about in Acts 2 and throughout Acts: healings, deliverances, breaking of demonic strongholds. Again, this is my opinion here, but I think the church has to be open to such moves, and a church that is going to be a place upon which the Holy Spirit rests and resides and is active. Part of my argument in saying we need to be open to all of this is that we're seeing the flip side of what's going on in the culture, the dark demonic stuff that is out there, that is just a validation that there is a spiritual realm and that there are dark things going on. And if there's a dark demonic thing that's going on, then there's also something that is heavenly and righteous and pure and good, and that Holy Spirit is within Christians, that we have the power and the authority to go out and proclaim deliverance and break strongholds within the power of Jesus. Do we just kind of hope that God, we pray that God just shows up and does something and like, man, that's pretty bad, but God just take care of that matter, that mess? Or do we move out in his power and speak in authority over principalities, over these dark things, these spiritual demonic strongholds? Are we willing to go there? That's my question. First of all, is the church still operate this way? And then if so, are we willing to go there? I think any true revival movement has to be open to seeing the miraculous in its midst. If you're praying for a revival, if you're saying, God, revive this nation, revive my church, revive my home, revive my community, and that has to start within the church, I believe. But I mean, even further from that, it has to start right within ourselves. But then to say, if I'm praying for revival, then that means Satan is going to come against it. And there's going to be things that we have to encounter, and we have to proclaim truth over. And so sometimes that gets messy, sometimes it gets uncomfortable, but I look at the ministry of Jesus, I look at the ministries in Acts, and I say they didn't shy away from it. They were all in. They didn't avoid any of these things, so neither should we. All right. If you've held with me this long, we've got our last point, and that is just kind of a good point to end on, is that the church that is going to stick around post-COVID will be a gospel-focused church. That may seem pretty obvious, but stick with me here. Two verses that apply, I believe. 2 Timothy 4, verse 2, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. And then the other verse is our theme verse, which is Ephesians 5, 15 through 17. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. So those couple of verses talking about this need to preach and to be ready and to stay on mission and on task with the gospel. Talked about it a little bit before we got into this, but there's these woke far left agendas that are seeping into the church. I think they even come in through the seminaries that are filtering our pastors out, the culture itself, of course. And, everybody wants to be relevant, it seems. That's something I've talked about before. Relevant to the culture. How do we reach the culture? Well, do we kind of become a little bit more like the culture? Do we do things that will draw people in because we're saying, hey, Jesus is one of us, and some of these messages that sound really good and they're appealing? Or are we truly preaching the gospel and saying, no, we're sinners, we're messed up. Jesus came to live with us. Jesus came to be in our world, but he was sinless and he went to the cross. Why did he have to go to the cross? Well, it's because he wanted to give us the opportunity to have life, because our sin is separating us from God to be with him. And I think that these messages that are coming through these churches, they are not going to have staying power past a generation or two. I truly believe this, because there's no meat there. There's nothing that's like going to keep drawing people to be like, hey, let's keep going to that church. The feel good stuff only lasts so long. And I think past 25 to 50 years, there's going to be whole denominations, whole church movements there will be no more. We're already seeing some of that now, but the decisions that they're making now are affecting their longevity and whether they will be here. Without a consistent preaching of the gospel, there will be nothing to draw people. There's nothing to compel them to come in and experience true transformation. There's this mantra that's just kind of, come as you are, stay as you are, leave as you are. What does that do for somebody? And really, it's failed, and it continues to fail. The church, as just a social club, is not going to survive, and their mantles that they once had will be taken away from them. What's the good news? Well, it's just that, the good news. It's going to reach many because there is a hunger, there is desperation, there's despair, there's hopelessness that we've never seen before, at least not in my lifetime. And the gospel is going to meet those people where nothing else could. No social program, no amount of wokeness, no amount of inclusivity, if I'm saying that right. No amount of any of those things is going to save except the gospel, which truly transforms and truly brings hope. And I don't think we have time to play around. We don't know how long this season of openness and availability, the freedom to speak about Christ will be until it's cut off. And really, we're seeing persecution already in many parts of the country. There's cities, there's places where the gospel is really not well received and welcome. But who knows? Maybe those will be burgeoning underground movements that will spark revival and that'll spread from there. Maybe we'll see places like San Francisco or Portland or New York City just on fire, and that'll catch fire to the rest of this country. We can pray for that. We can pray that the church is alive and well, even underground in those areas. All that to say, we have to be ready in season and out of season. And that's kind of my takeaway for this last point, is that a church that is still around tomorrow, next year, 5, 10, 15, 50 years from now, it will have stayed focused on the gospel. It will not have left that just to go to something else that's easier to preach. So as we close out today, I know this episode's a little bit out of the norm of some things that I've addressed lately, but then I kind of go back to some previous topics for those that maybe are like, why did you go down this path? I say, well, we did the Armor of God, we did the Be Generous series, we did this great gospel. So you've heard me say some of these things in different, maybe just through different ways in other episodes. So I'm hoping that then you would understand that I'm laying some of the groundwork for having this discussion now. And really, it should be something that we're all thinking about. Where does the church go? Where's the culture going? Do we even need to make some changes, or is everything I've just mentioned just kind of not really that applicable or not really a big deal? That's something that I just lay before you, and I say, what would you do with any of this? And I think that's my main question, is that I'd love to hear from you. Am I off my rocker here? Am I completely just, crazy for mentioning these things? I've expressed that this is a lot of my own thought that's in this content today, but I've tried to also give some biblical support and just back it up. And still, really, this is what I see, and this is what I think is going on, and it's how I'm trying to react to much of it. Is this what you're seeing as well? And how are you doing overall? I'd love to hear from you. Easiest way to do that is drop me a line, email me, info@DerekCharlesJohnson.com. Love to take this discussion offline and just keep having it, because I think as Christians we're, again, needing to think smaller, needing to think about one-on-one relationships, connecting with each other. Even as you listen to this, there's not much connection besides just over the airwaves of you listening to this. But through email, through conversations, through face-to-face, one-on-one, if we can have those conversations wherever we go, then we're establishing relationships and we're really able to be in each other's lives. I think that's important. I'm going to read this verse one more time as we wrap up. The theme verse, which I already mentioned, but if this is something that has blessed you, encouraged, I don't say encouraged, but it's somehow spoken to you, would you share it with somebody else? Would you pass it along? I know we're going on 40 minutes plus, so it's one of my longer episodes, but it's a lot to talk about, and you could do a whole series on this. You could talk about the church post-COVID for weeks. These are just some of the highlights, the main things that I wanted to hit. But if it's something that has resonated with you, would you pass it along to someone else and share the link for it? All right. Well, we will close up and we will be back next time for another one-off sort of podcast. But Ephesians 5:15-17 brings us to a close. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Guys, God bless you. Take care. Hey guys, this is Derek Charles Johnson. You have been listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast. I am a blogger, a songwriter, an artist. And if you've been encouraged by this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe and share, and head over to DerekCharlesJohnson.com for more encouraging content. God bless.